State your name, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm Charlie Stringer, better known as Chuck, with my family.
And you were born in October 23rd, 1930.
That's right, in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
And how old were you when you moved to Dartmouth?
We moved to Dartmouth in 1943, during the war.
And where was your earliest home that you lived in Dartmouth?
We lived on Gidley Road, which is off of Fisher Road.
Which is now called Gidley Town Road.
And that's the road that takes you down to Westport and Hicksbridge, down that way. But that's Gidley Road for a short ways, and then you leave Dartmouth and go into Westport, and then I think it's changes names or something.
Hicksbridge.
But anyway, that was Annie and Tom Marshall lived in the house, and she was badly crippled with arthritis, and so we moved in with her kind of to help her along and take care of her. And after a while, she had a daughter, but she lived over in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, kind of out of reach. But she decided to make arrangements to move over there to be with her daughter. And then a short time later, we moved across the road and down the lane to the old Job S. Gidley farm. And that's Job S. Gidley that the school was named after in the Smith Mills area. That was his home location. Of course, he was long gone and I never met him, but that was the history to the house where we moved at that time.
Okay. So the next question would be, where did you go to school in Dartmouth?
Well, I went to the Russell's Mill School, and I was in the 7th grade at that time, and it was like April of the year when we moved there, so it was a very short time in the 7th grade. It had 8 grades in the school with 4 classrooms, so each classroom taught 2 classes. We took 2. I think in the morning was 1 grade and the afternoon was another.
That's a good way to do it.
And probably about 6 or 8 kids in each class.
Okay.
It wasn't a big deal. And so from there, then of course I went on to high school. And
now, was that the Pool School?
Yes.
Which is our town hall now.
That's right, yeah. But at that time it was the high school, right.
Okay.
Oh, well, of course when I went to high school, I took the agricultural course. So of course, now the teacher was Carl Erickson. And I can't say enough good things about Carl Erickson. He was a real gentleman, he was a real good educator, an outstanding person. And so all the farmers in town knew him because they would even come by the school and ask him questions at times. And so, along with other activities, in order to make it interesting, then at that time the state had contests like milk judging, and the idea of that was a farmer ought to know what it takes to make a good tasting quality milk. there are things that affect the flavor of it. Mainly feed, different kinds of feed. If they get out and eat certain grasses or whatever, it'll affect the taste of the milk. And so he was teaching this kind of thing. And we would go once a year to Amherst, to the state college out there, and that's where we would participate in these milk judging contests. And he was known in the state as one of the better people to teach that, and so his students did very well. And in 1947, I won the first prize in the state for judging milk. I felt sorry for the fellow that came in second, because I won by 16/100ths of 1 point, which is kind of ridiculous, but that's how they broke down the score in it, you know.
So that was state.
And that was the state level. So I got a gold medal with a blue ribbon, and that qualified me to go to the national contest in Waterloo, Iowa. So that was a big deal. We went out there on the train.
Who went with you? Who went with you?
Carl didn't go with us. I went with another instructor, and right now I can't remember his name, from another school.
Okay.
I guess it wasn't unusual for the various instructors to appoint 2 or 3 people at the most that would go out there with all the state's boys, you know. And so I don't remember who it was, but I think it was a fellow in Braintree, and his student came in second. And I went out there for a week, and that was an exciting thing. And it was a National Dairy Congress, they called it, which is their big fall fair at the time. And so part of it was to hold these judging contests. And out there, they didn't want just to have a gold, silver, and bronze, 3 people. They felt like that was cheating a lot of good students. So they would take the first 10%, and they would be gold award in the second and third. So that way 30% of the students got recognized. So that was a pretty good deal.
Yeah, you did very well.
And I came in the silver group, they called it, which would be the second 10% group. And the following year, let's see, the year before that, the student ahead of me, John Sylvia from North Dartmouth, placed out there. I think he was, I don't know if he was gold or silver. And the year after, Raymond Hacking lived on Chase Road, was in the third group. So what I'm pointing out is that Carl Erickson kept producing winners in that contest.
Sounds good.
And so that was kind of interesting, and it was quite a trip for a high school boy to take.
I guess. So what was your first job that you had? And where was that?
Okay, I worked for J.T. Smith on, gee whiz, what's Westport.
Was it Hicks
Something
Ridge?
Hill Road, what is it?
Pine Hill. Pine Hill?
Pine Hill Road, yeah. Julius T. Smith. He had a garden farm, and he had a whole field full of rhubarb, which he provided to the markets in Boston and Providence. And we would go there and harvest that and put it in boxes, wash it off, and our hands would be black like we'd been handling tar. That's what it stained your hands, you know. And then that Sunday you'd go to church and they'd have a dinner and you're there with these black hands and everybody's looking at you and you try to tell them it's my job that did that.
So how old were you around that time?
Well, that was midway through high school. I guess that was 47 and 48 when I was working for him. And so we worked for 50 cents an hour. We worked 8 hours a day and half a day on Saturday. And after the rhubarb was early, before the other crops came in. And then, of course, he grew celery, which was unusual. And he had the irrigation system, you know, to water it and all that. And he had hothouse tomatoes. And 2 big greenhouses about as high as this ceiling, and tomato plants up there. And those were really first-class tomatoes. And I think he sold them like 50 cents a pound or something. It was a good crop. So that was some of his specialties. And he was a real good guy and really enjoyed working for him. So that kind of got me into the working area of farming. And meanwhile, I was raising heifers, and I got to the point where I finally started selling milk to Health and Dairy. And then, of course, the same old thing, 5 years after the Second World War ended, here come the Korean War, and that changed everything. And so that started in June of 1950, and I didn't want to get left behind and not do my duty, so it was about January of 52 when I finally decided, well, I can't keep up this farming thing. I'm going to have to go in the military, and I want to volunteer. So I ended up selling off the cattle. That was the end of that. And a side note, the first cow and calf that we bought when we moved to Dartmouth, we bought from a fella during the Second World War who was selling them because he went in the army and his mother and father were too old to carry on the farm, and that's how I got started. And ironically, I ended up selling mine the same way because of the Korean War. And so that kind of tells you about how wars affect farming and people being farmers. But it's just kind of coincidental.
Now, you were telling me earlier about working grain.
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
your grain story?
Yeah, okay. Somewhere along the line there, I got a job working for Bob Martha down the road here, just near Woodcock Road.
Okay.
That's where he lived, and he had a gas station, and then he sold grain to the farmers. And the way he operated that business is he had a number of farmers in town that he sold the grain to, and they would tell him how many tons they needed, and he would order it from the mill, and it would come into a siding up just north of Smith Mills. The railroad track runs through there. I guess off Fawn's Corner Road, I think it was. And so we'd go up there, and the train would be on the siding, and he'd give me the number of the car or something, and the key, and I'd unlock it. And we tried to deliver the 100-pound bags from the railroad car, so we didn't have to come back to his building and unload it there and then reload it to take to the farmer. We'd take it directly to the farmer. Do me a favor. So I would distribute the grain from there, and then whatever we had left over I'd bring and stack up. And so what happened there, I did that for 3 months. And then this other fella in town, and I can't remember his name exactly, but I was getting 50 cents an hour, as I recall. And then Frank came to me one day, about 3 months after I'd been doing that, and he says, "Hey, Charlie," he says, "I got another fella that he's married, he's got a baby, he needs a job real bad." And he was asking me if I needed any help, he says, and he says he's willing to work for 35 cents an hour. And I says, "Well, if you can find someone to do this for 35 cents instead of my 50, I think you better grab him." And I kind of meant that as a mean answer because, of course, I wasn't too happy. But that's how it ended, so I was out of work. And he had a job, so I didn't feel bad because the guy needed the job.
Now, when did you meet Cukie Macumber?
I never really did meet him. I just heard of him.
Oh, I
Because
understood
I went
that
to
you
school,
had
of course,
met him.
with Raymond Duvall, Russell Tripp, out of here. We were in the same grade together, and of course, when I worked for Smith, I was over there near Macumber Corner, and that's when I got to know the Macumbers, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I first heard about him, and then the next thing I know, he was marrying Alice Duvall. And so I really wasn't a buddy of his or anything, but it's somebody you know in town kind of thing. And that would be the relationship there. I don't know if he would even remember me. But he is a good fellow. All these people were real enjoyable people, real decent people.
Now, I have a good question for you.
Okay.
When did you meet Edith Hacking?
Well, that could be a long story.
We're here.
Raymond Hacking, I think I already
You
mentioned
mentioned him, yes.
was 2 years younger than me, but he was also going to high school in the ag class. His dad and mother and family had gone up to Alaska in early 1941 to homestead, of all things. And they were originally from New Bedford, south end of New Bedford. And the dad decided he'd like to try homesteading up in Alaska. And he got up there, and it wasn't quite what he expected, but he was up there. And so he wasn't making any kind of money, and he had a family to support. And just by chance, they were building, I think they called it Fort Raymond up in Alaska. And I think it was something like 40, 50 miles away. But anyway, he got a job there, building barracks and stuff. In other words, this country knew they were going to get sucked into the Second World War, and they knew they better start getting some troops placed around like we still do in different parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And so they were building up some forces up. And of course the Japanese came into the Aleutian Islands, you remember, before Pearl Harbor. They were messing around up there. And so anyway, he was working, building an army base, helping to build Fort Raymond, I think he called it. And then when Pearl Harbor hit us, then President Roosevelt, as you know, we had all these Japanese on the West Coast, didn't have any hard feelings against them, but the way the Japanese operated and attacked us unexpectedly, we didn't know if they had spies among all those people. And in safeguarding that, that's when he decided to inter them in these camps out on the West Coast and lock them all up in case there were some spies in there. They were locked up, kind of thing. At least that's the reasoning behind it. But I'm kind of getting off the track here. But anyway, that's all part of the deal. So now President Roosevelt also said anybody that was up in Alaska less than 1 or 2 years had to leave, because maybe they were sent up there to be spies or something, you know?
Okay.
And rather than go and looking for them, they say, well, anybody hasn't been here, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 years, has to leave. Fortunately, Ray's mother and dad, when they moved up, the mother says, I'm going to save this money aside for transportation back home where we came from in case it doesn't work out. Because transportation was bus. If they took a ship down through what they call they had a name for it, like inland waterways. Rather than go out into the full ocean, Jap subs were out there, then sinking shipping. And this old skipper on the boat that went up and down to Alaska knew the inland passageway, which was protected from submarines. And so they had an interesting story to tell about that. They said some places you could almost touch the land on each side from the boat. It was that narrow, but he squeezed that boat through. And so they got back to Washington, then they got on a bus and came back to New Bedford.
In Washington.
So that's a long story. That's how I met Ray Hacking.
That's how you met Ray.
He happened
but
to have
how
a
did you-
sister.
Okay, that's what we want to know.
And that happens more often than once, right?
Yep.
So, and also, when he came back, he worked at Cornell Dubilier. They made capacitors or condensers for electronics, as we call it now, for radios. And that was a big wartime job in the Second World War. Well, he was a machinist, and he worked for them. My older brother Bill, 10 years older than me, worked there as a carpenter. And he used to come home talking about Al Hacking that he on the job. They hit it off on the job pretty well, you know. So when I went to high school and Ray Hacking's in my class, and I says, hey, I think my brother knows your dad, you know, kind of thing. And then I was looking at the paper one day, and there's a picture of Edith Hacking, who's in the 8th grade in Russell's Mills, and I think she got elected class president or something, and well, there's his sister Edith. And so that was my first knowledge of her. Well, as we went along in high school, several of us boys, in the class, in the evening, for something to do, we started going to Lincoln Park to the roller skating rink and roller skating. And I had never roller skated. I was falling all over myself, but we laughed ourselves silly at each other. So once a week on Friday, we'd go there, and then I met Edith. And we were still in high school then. And and it just went on from there. So we just found each other interesting, and it was kind of funny. Her dad was one of these no-nonsense dads, and she said that when she was in school, you know, she'd meet a boy and he'd come driving up the house and he on Chase Road, and he'd drive up in the yard, and her dad would look out and say, "Who's that guy?" And she looked, oh, I go to school, and he's out there, and he'd look at me and say, "Get rid of him." So she'd have to go out and talk to him for a while and then tell him he had to leave. Well, guess what? I'm friends with Ray. Her dad's working with my brother Bill. So one day I drive in the yard, and he looks out the window, "Who's that guy?" And said, "Oh, that's Charlie Stringer."
And you didn't get chased off, huh?
And he says, "Does he have a brother?" "Yeah, Bill Stringer." "Oh, I know that guy. Yeah, bring him in." So we ended up married.
Yep, you got married June 20th, 1953.
That sounds familiar, yeah. Yeah, that's right. I had already been in the Army then, and fortunate for me, the war was on, and they sent me to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then I was in training out there, and she was 2 years behind me. She went to nurses training at St. Luke's Hospital, New Bedford. And so I'm in the Army, she's in nurses training. We already decided we might like to get married, but she was devoted to her 3 years, and I'm in the Army. And so along about 1953, we decided to get married, and she came out to, I was stationed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She graduated, got her, she was a graduate nurse, ready to get her RN. She came out, we got married, and then we started a family from there. So that's how I met her, and ended up with a very successful marriage.
But going back to your job when you were doing the grain,
Yeah.
did you have any specific requests by any of the wives of the farmers you were delivering the grain to for certain bags?
Oh, well, of course. What a nuisance that was. Yeah, that's when somebody in one of these mills decided to print designs on the grain bag so it would sell better. And then the wives would use them to make aprons, might even make a dress or something out of it. And so now I got all this grain down here that I didn't deliver from the car. It's all stacked up in the shop in piles. And one of the women would come in and say, "See this apron? I want to make a dress just like it. And I need a bag of grain with that print." So I go out there, and guess what? It's down at the bottom of the pile. But you got to keep the customer happy, so it would take a little bit of a while, but I would give her that bag of grain, and she'd be tickled to death.
Now, going back to when you were on Rockadundy Road, you used to raise ducks and chickens, and you had some turkeys.
We had a turkey when we moved into Gidley Road.
Okay.
You probably heard about that.
That might be the one, was that Tom though? Or,
Tom
Tom Turkey?
Turkey, yeah.
okay,
Now, when my folks bought a cow and a calf from the guy going in the army, he also had a turkey running around. And so we bought the turkey, and we brought it with him. And it was fun. He just strutted around the yard, you know, minding in his own business, and it's just fun to have him around. And so my sister Ethel's husband lived up the road, and he would come stop off every now and then. And one day she was doing some canning, and he borrowed my mother's big can that you put all the bottles in when you're doing the canning or bottling or whatever you want to call it. And they borrowed that pan so she could do that. And when he brought it back a few days later, he came driving in the yard. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. He brought it back, and then I guess it was a few weeks later, when he brought it back, he walked by the turkey, and the turkey come running and strutting to him, you know, and he had the lid in his hand, and he went like that at the turkey, and the turkey jumped back, you know, and he just thought it was kind of funny, and he went in the house, and then he left, and about a week later, he came back, and he came driving in, and his car was giving him trouble. And so he came driving in, and he picked up the hood on it, and he's leaning over, checking the spark plug or whatever, distributor, because see what the heck's wrong. And all of a sudden, we hear this commotion, and we look out, and the turkey's up on his back, pecking him, because he didn't like that lid being pushed in his face on the previous week. And he did, and after that, every time he came in that yard, that turkey would chase him, and he would run. So that was just kind of a silly, funny thing. Finally, Thanksgiving came along, and he got his revenge.
that's funny. That was my father.
What more can I say about that?
Does anybody have any other suggestions for?
You asked Dad about living on Chaffee Street.
Well, we were trying to keep it into
Okay.
the Dartmouth.
He's talked to me a lot about that, you know.
I remember having pigs down on Rockadundy Road.
I can't tell.
She remembers you having pigs.
It was an old foundation.
Yeah, we had pigs
Okay.
there.
All right, let's sit back and I'll ask you another question.
Okay.
So that way it's easier for him to
I'm
edit.
wondering what you can ask me about pigs.
Grandma always told us if we fell in there, they'd eat us. So stay away from them.
She says that Grandma always told us if we fell into the pig pen, the pig would eat us. So for us to stay away from them.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
I don't think I remember that. Obviously, they didn't.
No.
Didn't fall in.
You can't always believe what Grandma says, I guess, huh?
She lied to us?
So, hey Dad, talk a little bit about building those walls on Rockadundy.
Building the stone walls on Rockadundy Road for your farm.
Well, one of the things that I learned about that is of course, he was a carpenter, and so he built the barn that I had to put the cows in.
You're talking Uncle Bill. Uncle Bill?
Yes, yeah. So he built the barn, and I helped him, and so part of doing that, of course, you see all these stone walls that we got around, and you have to move all these rocks out of the way and stuff, and so that wasn't any problem. But of course, some of them you just pick up and move away, and then others I had a horse, and we put a hook onto the rock with that and tow it and let the horse pull it. But one day we were moving rocks, and then pretty soon, they're dwindling, and you leave the big ones for last. And pretty soon, we made one load, and then we looked back, and he says, "Hey, Chuck," he said, "look at that rock we just put on the truck." He says, "How the hell did we do it?" I says, "I just threw running out of other smaller ones, and so we got a big kick out of it. As we went along, they kept getting bigger and heavier, and we still kept picking them up until finally we couldn't do it anymore. And so those are the ones you see all scattered in one spot corner of the field,
They never got
They
put
don't
into...
go anywhere, they just stay there.
What was your fondest memories of Dartmouth?
I was so happy that we moved from New Bedford to Dartmouth because to a young boy, it was an adventure to get out there, on the farms and all that kind of thing that I got involved in. I was lucky, I got to travel, got a trip to Waterloo, Iowa, and so it was very good to me. I met a lot of good people, and it was a highlight of my life. So I have very positive, enjoyable memories. And
Can you remember some of the names of the boys that you went to school with over at the Russell's Mill School,
yeah,
which is
of
now
course.
Salt Marsh Pottery?
Ray DeVauld and Russell Tripp, and I guess those are the two that come to mind. There was a Henry Simon that graduated in my 8th grade, who was from Smith Neck Road. There was a Patami family there. There was a boy and a girl from there. So these are some of the people. Hell Fans on Chase Road, there were some of those children. Eleanor, I think, and of course Ray Hacking and Edith and Fred Zuber up in North Dartmouth, who also was in high school and took part in the FFA contests and things.
That's FFA, is Future Farmers
and
of
then-
America.
And he had a brother, and I'm trying to think of his first name, but he had a younger brother that was a real nice fella who ended up in the Navy. In fact, when I was leaving to go in the Army, and I went to the airport to fly to New York area or something, and he was on the same flight, and he had already joined the Navy, and I was in the Army, and we left on the same plane to go back from a leave that we had, and that's the last time I had seen him. So these are some of the people that I was very much friendly with and sharing life and such as that. So those are some that come to mind. I'm having a little bit trouble now because we're talking like 60-some years ago. And things are getting a little bit, I have to think twice, you know, is that right? You're about 40 years too late asking me these things.
Well, but we want to ask them so that we know what it was like for living in Dartmouth and
Some
growing
things
up.
we never forget, right?
Right, right.
For good reasons.
You have, Marion, you've got some pictures over there?
Yeah.
Because that might help bring some pictures.
Oh, my.
Who's that? You were how old there?
I think I was 7 years old. Oh, boy. That's the first picture I remember, I think. Am I supposed to go through here and
Go
look at the
through
pictures?
it and you can, yep, because Dan's gonna get the pictures and he'll fit them in as you're talking. Who's in the sailor suit?
Well, this
No, just talk.
This is us 4 children. And my brother, of course, he's playing the part of a big brother, and he's making the worst face he can possibly think of, just as the camera snapped. And they took the picture anyway, and just to punish him, that's what sat in the family parlor, is a picture of the family kids. I don't know if he ever did that again or not, but anyway. So that's Ethel and Emma, and I guess I was rooting for the sailors at that time, and they bought me a sailor suit.
So, where was this picture taken? Do you remember?
That was 1186 Chaffee Street,
That was
north
on
end
Chaffee
of New
Street.
Bedford.
Okay.
The last house on the road. And one of the interesting things about that is it was the end of the road, and you looked out in the woods, and every night, just as it was getting dark, and especially in the winter when it was cold and the trees are cleared off, you'd see this fire going through the top of the trees.
The train?
And there was a train.
The train.
And the thing was that when they came out of town, they were locomotives, and they shovel coal in to build up the fire and get it going, you know, to pick up speed. And they'd open the doors, and when they did that, the drafts would blow all the fire up the stack more than usual, and they'd come out the top, and you could see a fire going across the, and we, you know, those days we had people come to the house. Like I remember one time an insurance man would come, I think twice a month, to collect insurance payment for life insurance my folks had, and so they used to do things like that. I remember one night we were in there and the window shade was up, and he was there, and all of a sudden, boy, he went like, well, look, what's that? You know, he couldn't understand this fire going through the woods. I said, oh, that happens every night. That's the train leaving the station, and he's shoveling in the boiler.
What's the next picture?
Oh, that's more the same. A few years older. All right, now we're going to be farmers, and there's my dad and I cutting some hay with a scythe of all things. But that's what you did in those days.
And where was this one taken?
So we were goofing off. My mother came out with a camera to take our picture, and we just hammed it up and acted like we were leaning on our sides like we were worn out or something, I
Was
guess.
this Gidley Road or Rockadundy?
I'm thinking this would be Gidley Road, I think.
Okay.
And then there's the cow, the first cow we had. Shall I go on? Now, I guess this is Jim. The interesting thing is, my brother went in the Army, 1942. He joined the Army and went off to Fort Riley, Kansas, took his basic training. Then he came home and for the first leave, and my mother wasn't in the house, and he says, "Where's Mom?" And my dad says, believe it or not, she's in the hospital. And so he's, what happened? He says, she had a baby. Their old mom don't want Bill to worry and tell him that she's going to have a baby, but he comes home on leave and finds out he's got a baby brother. Very unusual, nothing wrong with it, but Jim was 13 years younger than me and 23 years younger than Bill. So, of course, Jim was part of our family, but he went to school with all the brothers and sisters' children, as you
Right,
know.
right.
He was in the same grade with you.
He was in the same grade with my older sister
And
Carolyn.
he'd tell the kids that you'd say, "That's my uncle," and they wouldn't believe you.
That's what she would say.
So that's what I think of when I look at me with that little baby up on my shoulders. That's my little brother.
What's the next picture?
Ironically, let me kick back to something here.
Go ahead.
The fellow we bought the first cow from had to sell him to go into the Second World War in the
Yeah.
service. I went in the Korean War, and he was just right for the Vietnam War, and he ended up over in Vietnam before the war was declared in the Marines. And the thing that I stew about now is that they got into a firefight with him, and his whole squad except him got wiped out, either got killed or wounded, and somehow he survived, and he felt guilty. It bothered him, and he never got over it. And so this is what I think about when we're still messing around nowadays with Afghanistan, who my grandsons had 2 tours of duty there. And I'm not finding fault with us doing this, because I feel that we're doing the right thing each time. Somebody in the world has got to take care of the bad guys. And I remember when I was a kid thinking, how come every generation has got a war? And then it dawned on me one time, because every generation has good guys and it has bad guys. And I guess that's why every generation's got to have a war. Everybody don't see things the same way. And that's the only way I can justify it. But those are some of the kind of things you think about. And
Which house is this?
that's the one on Gidley Road.
This was
That was-
the Marshall?
Pardon me?
Was this the Marshall house?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Tom Marshall and Annie Marshall lived there. And
The Gonsalves live in that now.
and that was right down the house from you,
Yep,
road from your house.
yep.
So that's the first house we moved to in Dartmouth. And that got us started with our life in Dartmouth.
Okay.
Whoa, there's the There's the big graduation class, 8th grade class graduating from Russell's Middle School.
There's 11 of you there.
I see Gideon Howland, Henry Simon, Herbie Hill, Frank Rose, Russell Tripp, Charlie Stringer, Ray Duvall, Lawrence. I'm trying to think of her first name. Was it Barbara Lawrence? And I think it's Emily Pimentel. And woo, boy, I'm having trouble.
I think there's some names down at the bottom.
And this is Francis' girl.
What's-
Oh, well,
got
gee,
some names?
thanks for the help. Cecilia Pimentel, Teresa Casola, and Mary Francis. And the rest of them I got right.
Well, I wanted to see how good your memory was.
And about half of those I haven't seen since I went in the Army. And some of them I have.
I noticed you had the gentlemen's names down pat, but not the women, so
Well, you might notice that that's only the 8th grade. We weren't
Right.
taking much notice of girls up at that point, I guess.
I guess,
Probably high school, I'd know more of the girls.
what's the next
Like I
picture?
married one of them.
Right? What's the next picture? Oh, okay. That's the house.
Yep, I recognize that.
Rockadundy.
That was 167 Rockadundy Road till the post office changed it to 267. Why, I don't know. I guess there were no houses in between. I don't know what difference it made. But anyway, yeah, that's
Also known as the Jesse Crapo house.
right. And
Yeah.
you know who Mr. Crapo was in later years?
Well,
He became the first governor of Michigan.
That was Jesse's son, Henry. It was Jesse's son, Henry.
Okay.
He moved into the house when he was about a year old.
He was a baby.
Yep.
Yeah, the father, Crapo, according to what I read, I've got a copy of the book that he published. And as I remember from that, he built a house for each of his sons, and maybe the daughters, I don't know, when they got married. And so he built this house. His daughter married Henry Crapo, I guess was his name, right?
Henry Crapo was the
That's-
oldest boy. Was the oldest boy.
That's right. You're right, yeah. Okay, see, I'm telling you, it's 60 years is getting in the way here or something. Right. Yeah, so they built a house and it wasn't finished in time for for him to move in and be born there.
Right.
The family was still living with the mother and dad. Moved in about a year later or something like that, I understand.
So what's the next picture?
So, pardon me?
What's the next picture?
Well, that's another picture of just the area.
That's your shed. Did you have any animals that were in the shed? Oh, and I know this one, the outhouse.
Yeah,
We used to use
yeah.
that one quite
They're too small to
often.
put an animal in. Yeah.
Was that a single or a double? Do you remember?
No. I never needed a double. Single, I didn't notice as long as
Single? Huh?
It was a double.
Marion says it was a double that she remembers.
I used to wonder why they had two, because I can't imagine two people and then at the same time. I don't know how they lived back in those days.
What's the saying? When you gotta go, you gotta go?
Yeah, that's right. There's a few of the stones that got left behind when we
Okay.
cleared the field.
All right.
And here's some of the cattle. Yeah.
Do you remember any of the cows' names? Was there a Betsy?
Yeah, Baby was the first one, and that's what the fella named it that we bought him from.
Okay.
And then I had Elsie, and I had Betty, and I don't remember after that. And here's the three boys of the family. My brother Bill and me and my young brother Jim.
And you can tell when this picture was
And
taken.
he's still wearing the patch where he used to have a right eye and he lost it in the Battle of the Bulge. And that didn't slow him down. He was a carpenter, he built houses, and he would hire one fella to work with him and help him, and he would build a whole house for a person. And then before he was done, somebody would be driving by saying, "Boy, that looks like a house I'd like to have." And they'd stop by and talk to him, and so he'd say, "Yeah, I can build you one." And so he always had somebody waiting for him to build another one. So he's got a variety of houses, most of which look alike because that's what they wanted, and he was producing what they wanted.
Well, he built himself a cape.
Yeah,
So is that mainly what he stayed with
that
on
was
building?
basically like, it was basically the same, yeah. He had one up there on Slocum Road, just on the corner of Allen Road. I think it was Allen and Slocum Road. He built that one for a veteran from the war, after the war, when he came home. That was his first house he built. He built one across from Round Hill, Colonel Green's is what I'm trying to think of. Colonel Green Estate.
Mm-hmm.
He built one there. He built, I'm trying to think of all the places he built. I had one, I think, Prospect Street in Padenham. And then I left town, and he kept building, and I didn't know where they were. But he's got them all over town.
Okay, what's the next?
There's the horse I had, Joe. And
So Joe was the horse that would be pulling the stones out of the field?
he's the guy that pulled a lot of rocks out of the ground and dragged them off and dragged trees out of the wood to put up fences. And that's me and Jim up on the horse. He's starting to grow up now.
Yeah, that's Jim. All
He's a
right.
little fella, but he can get up on the horse. And I still think of having to sell him to go in the army, like the fellow we bought the first cows from.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's me and Jim, and it looks like Billy Ward, I think. I think this is Billy Ward.
I'm not sure who it is.
Yeah, I think that's Emma's son, Billy Ward.
Okay.
she,
Who's,
and that's the dog that we had. And I think we called him Whiskers. He had big whiskers. That was a family dog.
so it looks like you're sitting outside of the outhouse?
Right.
Okay.
Now, let me just throw a little in about my sister Emma. My mother and dad, and I think of this all the time, we hear about immigrants in the country. And, you know, we're thinking about these immigrants coming into the border down there in Mexico. Well, I moved to Tennessee after I got out of the Army. And among other things, I ended up getting into the rental business, and I had several rental houses, and I had a duplex built that I rent out, and I happen to have a family who are from California, and they're Mexicans. And so I go over there, you know, and I'm talking about a couple of years ago. I go over there and I get the rent, you know, and say hi, and the woman's got a really nice family, really enjoyable. And one day it finally struck me, you know, I'm thinking that she's Mexican. She's probably her family's lived in California years before my family came over from England, and I thought, hey, Charlie, you're probably more of an immigrant than that woman there that I'm thinking is a recent immigrant. You know, and it kind of made me realize, put things in perspective, that most of us, none of us, we all came from Europe or Asia or somewhere to populate this country.
True.
And some got here before others, you know, but we're all immigrants to North America. And in that respect, one's no different than the other except for the times that you're dealing with. And so you have to respect all of them because you're all one of a kind. We're all previously immigrants, and we have to remember that. And that's, I'm glad I thought about that. And it makes me feel good to meet these people because I'm one of them in respect, and I've been successful, and I hope they are, and I'd be glad to help them out. Mm-hmm. But I think we've got to control how many come in at a time. I mean, if we get overrun, pretty soon everybody's suffering. I don't know how to solve that problem. I don't know what we're going to do, but those are some of the things we have to think about when we're trying to find solutions, I think, you know, to be fair and decent about it, and try to come up with a solution that's good for everybody.
What's the next picture?
We still got pictures.
Yeah, I got a
Well, that's
few.
another one. Well, I think maybe we finished building the barn there. Bill built the barn. I think he's waving his hat. I think we must have finished building the
Okay,
barn.
who else is on the horse with you? Isn't there?
Well, that's my brother Bill and me and Jim and Billy Watt.
Okay.
I started to talk about Emma during the Second World War. She was going to vocational school, and she was also had a job at the hospital as a lab technician, they called it. She was the one that came around and took a blood sample for the people that's going to have a operation or something or whatever, And so she got a part-time job while she was in high school doing that. Everybody was part of the war effort, you know, and there was a shortage of labor in all this aspects of jobs and whatnot, and so she did that as her part. And so then, as the war progressed, my mother and dad were both from England, and we were reading the paper, and there was an article about an English sailor who was in town visiting his uncle and family. Well, it turned out his uncle's son was in my high school class, just by coincidence. But anyway, she saw his picture, and it mentioned he was from the same hometown as my mother. And she thought, I wonder if he knows some of our family over there. So she said, hey, Mom, is it all right if they told who he was visiting, if I call him and talk to him? So she did that, and so he said, yeah, I'll come out and visit you, you know. And so he came to the house, and real pleasant guy and all that, and they got talking.
So are you trying to get at, that's how this young
Well, that's where
boy
Billy
came-
Ward came from.
Okay.
That's so he went back to Digby, Nova Scotia, where his submarine was tied up. His duty in the war, when he got out of high school, he went right into the military because they were heavily in the war then. And he went into submarines, of all things, and got sent over here, and their job was to operate out of Nova Scotia, and any time an armada of, not an armada, but a convoy of ships with all the war material and personnel and whatnot that's going to Europe, when they were getting together and going to port, his submarine and other submarines went out there to contact the German U-boats, and somehow or other they knew where they were operating, and they would run into them, and when they did, they would try to harass them and bother them and keep them occupied. They were a decoy to lure them away while the ships of supplies slipped out of port and got the heck out of here before they knew what was going on. And so that was the kind of game that his submarine was playing. And so that's how they met. And then, you know, they continued riding, and next thing you know, I guess he came back again, and well, no, he didn't come back again. He was operating out of Digby, Nova Scotia, and they got to the point where they decided they wanted to get married. And so he invited her up there, and that's a kind of an interesting story. He invited her up there for a visit, and she went up there. And while they're up there, they went up there with the intentions of getting married, actually, although they didn't advertise it a lot. And so she was telling me that when they said they wanted to get married, and they talked to his superiors and all, they okayed it. They went and talked to the guy to get married, the pastor or whatever, and he says, well, there's only one thing wrong, he says. I can't marry this girl. She's of age and all that, he says, but I've got to have permission from her parents. And my sister said, oh, you know, it's all off. What are we going to do? And Bert steps up. He says, well, he says, I just happen to have a letter here from her parents that I had them send me. He knew all along, and he didn't tell her. And so while she's in this dilemma, he pulls out this letter that my mother and dad had written to him, giving them permission to marry their daughter. And so that was kind of a neat story that I throw in. So some of these kids are devious and they plan ahead. The parents don't know it.
What's the next picture?
I'm going to run out of stories here.
Oh, you're doing good.
Well, it just says you pose with a Sunday school class on Children's Day. Bill builds the cow barn, all the boys pitch in to help. Chuck is chosen it should be FFA member to represent the school in the national competition, Waterloo, Iowa, in milk judging. And brings home a medal for his work. And I already explained that.
Okay.
And this is just the family picture. This one includes your dad, Bud,
Okay.
and he's no longer harassed by the turkey. He's got a big smile on his face. Uh-oh, this is when I finished basic training. Fort Dix, New Jersey, when I went in the Army. And I got this look on my face like, what's going to happen next? And that's exactly what I was wondering. Now I'm out in New Mexico where they ship me out there for training, and I'm making believe I'm holding that sign up. And that's Lincoln National Forest. And so that was part of New Mexico, a whole different country out there.
Yep.
Now I'm marrying Edith. And this is
Now you got-
Smithville's Congregational Church.
Which the building doesn't exist
It
anymore.
isn't there anymore.
It isn't there anymore. It's, used to be next to the fire station on Route
Exactly.
6.
And I remember, the thing I remember about the fire station, they had a fireman there named Jack Whitaker. And he had an especially good voice, and he used to be known for his singing. I remember hearing him several times. And when I think about the church, I think of Jack Whitaker.
Okay.
Talking about Dartmouth and the friends you make and people
Yep.
you get to know, and I thought I'd throw that in just for remember Jack. And now there's Billy Ward, so that's why Billy kept showing up in the family there on the on the horse and everything, because when the war was
Actually, that's somebody else.
well, now how did that happen?
That's somebody else. That says Charles Raymond
Why,
Stringer.
my goodness, that's my own son. Wow. Okay, yeah, I told you. Edith finished training as a nurse and came out to New Mexico. And, well, I came home and we got married.
Right.
Then she graduated a few months later, finished her training and came out and joined me. And then while we were out in New Mexico, he was born. Out there, Alamogordo, New Mexico. And nowadays the kids are born in a hospital. He was born in a little dispensary, like a first aid station. That's all they had
That's
on the
interesting.
base. But one morning when she was expecting, I was getting all, I get up like 6 o'clock or something to go into, I was living off base then. And she was expecting, and I get up, and she says, you know what, I think today you better take me in with you. I says, why? I says, she thinks I'm going to have this baby. Because she was a nurse then, and she
But what a way to have your first
yeah,
in a
so
dispensary.
that day I went into join my unit. I was living off base, And I drove in the gate, and I stopped by the dispensary and dropped her off, and went in with her, and said to the guy in there, "She's ready to have this baby." And so I dropped her off, and now I'm thinking, well, I gotta go check in at formation, you know. They gotta wonder where Stringer is. So I went over to the unit there, and I think they'd already had their formation where they account for everyone. And I walk in and I talk to the first sergeant, and I said, "Hey, you probably missed me this morning, but I just dropped my wife off at the dispensary. She's in labor, and I just want to let you know why I'm late, you know." And he looks at me like, "Well, what the heck are you doing here? Get back over to the dispensary." He said, okay.
Duty first.
So that's
huh?
how we did things then. Now this is Jim right here, right? That's my mother and Jim, and I think that's Billy Ward.
No,
No?
I don't think so. I think that's.
No, is this Sharp?
Chuck and Mark. That's your two sons.
Okay.
The babies all look the same.
60-some years ago, it's getting a little bit hazy here. By gosh, that's my own son. That's all in the family.
We're beginning to wonder about Billy Ward.
Don't take offense. And there's a new family, me and Edith and Chuck. That may be when I got out of the Army and came home and brought Chuck with us. From
Didn't
New
leave him
Mexico.
behind.
We didn't leave him out there in the desert.
At the
Just walk
dispensary.
into the dispensary.
At the dispensary, yeah. Well, while I was out at my mother's, I came across this letter that was addressed to Mrs. Charles Stringer Sr. And it says, "Dear Mrs. Stringer, thank you for the delicious cookies you made for the fair. They were awarded the first and third prizes, so I am including the ribbons. Best wishes and many thanks. Sincerely, Bertha S. Shaw." So these are the first and third prize ribbons that your mother received for baking her cookies.
Okay, from the Dartmouth Grange,
From the
it looks
Dartmouth
like.
Grange, number
Yeah, okay.
162. So
How nice.
was grandmother a real good cook and
Well-
baker?
Well, of course. This proves it. Yeah, I wasn't aware of these. These are the kind of things that happen along the way, you know, and they get put away, and then you kind of get overtaken with all the other things in your life, and they fade out. But really,
So,
it's really a pleasure to be reminded of this. I'm glad that she got some recognition.
well,
Very good.
I always remember her making her beef and kidney pies, the little individual ones.
Right,
So when the family got together,
right.
everybody had those.
that's right. And One of the interesting things, I guess, of how things happen is that she worked in the mill during the war and all that, like all the women did. They replaced the men, and the few men that couldn't go into service that worked at the mill became their bosses, and boy did they catch it. Because they were managing a bunch of women that put them in their place. It wasn't like handling other guys. But anyway, that's just kind of a funny thing. The thing I remember her for in the cooking was the tomato soup cakes, as she called them.
Okay.
You remember those?
Yep.
It was a tomato, somehow it was tomato soup that you made in the cake, and they put big, what was it, Marifat raisins, I think they call them. They were huge.
Big raisins.
Somehow, they were, yeah, unusually large. And then a cream cheese frosting. And as ugly as that sounds, it was absolutely delicious.
For that.
Huh?
I said it was usually Campbell's tomato soup
Right,
that was
of
used
course.
for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things that I really enjoyed that she cooked and made.
So we still have that recipe.
Right, that, don't lose it.
We still have that recipe. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your memories.
Well, as you can probably tell, it was a pleasure thinking about these things. And I just had an outstanding family, and it's a lot of fun to think about it. And, you know, just share it with you.
Well, thank you.